Matter of fact, there was solid evidence that my husband had used drugs, my ex-husband, and that my ex-husband, like I said, was convicted. I did have these protective orders issued against him. He was, supervised, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There was plenty of evidence that would have proved to any court official that reviewed the history, okay, and you would not even need a microscope or magnifying glass to review, that any judge who would really look at what was on the table, minus the testimonies, okay, from his side, would see that this was not a man that should be given joint custody, much less sole custody.
May I ask, did you have a lawyer representing you in this proceeding?
I had a lawyer representing me, which was also very interesting because I had gone out on a limb significantly because of years battling in the courts with my ex-husband and what appeared to me to be so biased with religious, and the fact that the court was biased because they were his family's friends. They were his church family. So right there you have a biased opinion. But I knew that I needed a very good attorney. So I refinanced my house back in 2006, and I hired who I thought was the best. And this man has partners who literally work with Harford County in developing parental programs so that families will have to go through different county government parental programs, and that this particular firm is the one that develops this. Okay? So I hired him. The problem was, and I think that there were many problems, but one problem was that Richard Jacobs was going through not only a divorce, but was actually going through a remarriage at the same time.
This is your lawyer?
This is the lawyer. And so I meet with him, and I try to explain to him the complexities of the bias, and he's just like, yeah, I know, like if he had heard it before. And I keep thinking to myself, he does seem a little bit overly sure of himself without hearing the details, but he's been, deemed as the best and quite expensive, so I didn't know who to hire, and I was never involved in litigation before. So he had told me that he was going to be taking a honeymoon because he had just recently divorced his wife, or was he was in the process, or was recently divorcing his wife. He was living out of boxes. He was living out of suitcases. He was marrying his mistress that he, was very clear at describing how he was having a relationship with this woman before his divorce, and that he then married her and they went on their honeymoon. It was so disorganized that when my mother and a girlfriend of mine and I gave him his initial retainment checks, well, the initial retainer, I put pretty much stacks of hundreds on his desk that he pocketed. But then after that, there were also allotments made to the retainer that we gave in checks. He lost the checks twice. I mean, these were a decent-sized checks that an attorney loses with the excuse that he didn't know where he placed them because he was living out of boxes and suitcases and this type of scenario, when I'm looking at going into one of the most contested custody cases, if not the most contested custody case of Harford County's history, in part because of such religious differences.
Are you saying that he asked you to replace the checks with cash?
He asked me to replace the checks with checks. So in other words, he said, you lost them, or he lost them, and would I be so kind as to write another check? And we explained to him that, we would need to cancel the checks, and there would be fees and whatnot to cancel the checks. And he, apologized for that, but didn't necessarily deduct, the fees or whatever. And the second time, he also lost a check. The first time, I believe it was 2 checks, and the second time, he had only lost 1 of the 2. But my point is that this is a man who was extremely overly confident and curt when I was trying to go over the details. A lot of my friends and family also explained to me, no, Valerie, you don't want to state too many details to an attorney because you're on the clock, number one. And number two, if he's a competent enough attorney, that if you provide him with the proper documentation, he should be able to figure it out pretty quick on his own. So again, I must say, there was never a time before our 2-day trial that I was in any preparation meeting. There was never a time that he went over with me what to wear, how to speak on the stand. There was never any preparation made. There was that we did have a meeting. What is it called? Deposition?
Yes.
We did have a deposition meeting that was recorded, which I was very concerned about because my ex-husband, who had this very unscrupulous bulldog attorney. I say unscrupulous because this man has stated so many clearly false statements, and including even in writing. There was other times that other attorneys actually reprimanded this attorney to judges that he was making statements that were clearly false statements on the record, this attorney. Other attorneys had notified the court on this particular attorney. But this particular attorney, when we were in deposition, and my ex-husband would be making statements at deposition that were clearly not true. And I would look at my attorney like, you need to, catch them on this. You know that Mr. Carlton does not make that much money, or Mr. Carlton, did not go to college. I mean, flat facts that he was not arguing. And my attorney would say, don't worry about it because it's deposition, and later, it's supposed to be that volley back and forth of facts versus fallacy to kind of clarify. Again, I was not familiar with deposition. I had never been in a litigation before, so I trusted him. And I said to him at one point when we broke in the deposition meeting, I said, this is absolutely ridiculous. I don't know why we're here, because we're spending a whole lot of time and money simply sitting back listening to a bunch of lies. What are we doing? It's just wasting time putting lies down on the record. And he says, don't worry about it. He says, this is a piece of cake. I said, a piece of cake? He says, well, I would say that it's like sitting back at the beach, but I don't want to be so cliche. Verbatim, I remember this. So I said, okay, he's got to know what he's doing, and that's where we went. But what I really wanted to discuss is how a discombobulated, very twisted and corrupt civil case escalated and evolved into a 28 felony statewide media criminal case. Okay, that's really where we're at. I simply am wanting you to understand that my ex-husband does have very close family and church ties with these court and county executives. I want you to understand that the custody case and the public records involved in the custody case are clear evidence of bias and wrongdoing, because you don't not acknowledge that a person was convicted of assaulting a child that you're then giving custody to. You don't state that a woman is a drug addict with no urine test and no solid evidence. And you certainly don't state on the record that I am not a Jewess with no genealogy questioned, and that I am literally using Judaism to manipulate and alienate. You just don't do that.